Welcome to Teach, Learn, Share, a podcast that thoughtfully explores teaching and learning practices in higher ed. I'm Margo Eckenberg.
And I'm Jasmine Perrin. This podcast is brought to you by Teaching and Learning Services at McGill University. We're recording today from Montreal, Quebec, on unceded land which has long served as a site of meeting and exchange among Indigenous peoples, including the Haudenosaunee and the Anishinaabe nations. We honor their stewardship as we live and work on these lands. So today we've invited 4 special guests to the show. Each guest has implemented the 2-stage exam assessment strategy with various methodologies. We're really looking forward to hearing more about their version of the implementation and how it's impacted the learning experience of their students. So today we would like to welcome Dr. Lawrence Chen, who is an academic lead and faculty scholar of enhancing learning and teaching in engineering, also known as ELATE, and teaches in the Department of Electrical and Computer Engineering. Just this month, Lawrence has been awarded the Guy Rocher Prize for Excellence in Undergraduate Teaching at the university level from Quebec's Ministère de l'Enseignement Supérieur. Hi, Lawrence, and congratulations, and welcome to Teach, Learn, Share.
Hi, everybody. It's really a pleasure to be here this afternoon.
And we have Dr. Alice Cherestes, who is the Associate Dean of Academic Affairs in the Department of Bioresource Engineering in the Faculty of Agricultural and Environmental Sciences. Alice teaches courses such as General Chemistry, Analytical Chemistry, and Organic Chemistry. Welcome, Alice. We're happy to have you here with us today.
Thank you very much, and congratulations, Lawrence.
We have Dr. Laura Pavelka, who is a faculty lecturer in the Department of Chemistry in the Faculty of Science. Laura was a guest on our second mini-series of Teach, Learn, Share, where she initially discussed her take on 2-stage exams. We did have a lot of positive feedback on that episode, so we're really pleased to have you back, Laura.
Thank you so much, Jasmine. It's great to be back.
And finally, we have Dr. David Titley-Peloquin, who is a senior faculty lecturer and acting associate dean of student affairs of the Faculty of Agricultural and Environmental Sciences. David teaches courses covering topics such as physics, linear algebra, and mathematics. David and Alice work in the same faculty with a common interest in this assessment strategy. So we're very much looking forward to hearing from you both. Welcome, David.
Thank you, Jasmine. I'm so excited to be here.
So all of our guests today have used or currently use 2-stage exams as an assessment strategy in their courses. We'll hear very soon about the different ways they implement these 2-stage exams. But before we go any further, we wanted to make sure we were being clear about what 2-stage exams are. And essentially, it's an exam that's divided into 2 parts or stages, and it's taken at 2 different moments. So it includes an individual component and a group component. So for example, a student might complete an exam or quiz on her own, submit her answers, and then work to answer the same questions with other students. And teams will then have to reach a consensus to submit only one set of answers. We'll let our guests speak to what they see as the benefits and potential limitations of this kind of strategy. But at this point, we just wanted to underscore, as Jasmine was saying, how we really wanted to do a follow-up episode on this topic because of the way it can highlight student learning, as students really need to work through complex course material both on their own and with their peers. And we know also that multiple practice opportunities are really key for assessment for learning because it gives students this opportunity to deepen their learning. Another element that I did want to bring to the conversation, and listeners to season 1 of the podcast know this well, is that this kind of strategy can play a part in lowering exam-related stress. So we spoke to Laura previously on Teach, Learn, Share about this. If you haven't listened to that episode and you'd like to hear it, we'll be happy to share that link. And the final point I wanted to bring to the table to set up today's episode was to think about the fact that we can't really talk about any assessment strategy without taking into account what students' experiences are or have been with our assessments. So that was something that's key. And also, as all instructors know, things don't usually go according to plan with assessment strategies. Very rarely or sometimes never do things actually go the way we thought they would when we planned out an assessment strategy. They have to be tweaked, they have to be changed based on what students' experiences are and what actually happens in the classroom. So we're also really keen, Jasmine and I would really like to hear what kind of feedback today's guests have received from their students when they've worked with 2-stage exams and whether they've been able to integrate that feedback into further iterations of the course.
I think we'll dive into the first question. So I'm going to ask the question, and before answering, I just ask the person who is going to respond to please give a brief description of the context that they're speaking to. So the course that you teach, the class size, year of study, and potentially the exam type, if it's a midterm or final or both. So the first question is, would you say that two-part exams have allowed you to shift the focus from grades to learning? And if so, how? And I will ask Laura to kick us off with the first question, please.
Sure. Thanks, Jasmine. So for context for my courses, so I teach in the Department of Chemistry, the large organic courses. So these are U1 courses, although it is a mix of U1 and U0 students for the most part. These are very large, about 500 or 600 students. I don't know if it's a max scale for this kind of exam, but it's pretty high in terms of number of students. I'd been doing them primarily for midterms, although this past year, we've also instituted two-stage finals for the first time. So in terms of learning, I will say that organic chemistry is a very problem-solving based subject. And I think a lot of the learning that happens in that kind of context is through discussion and, healthy debate, maybe with colleagues about how to approach different problems. And there wasn't really an avenue to do that in a lecture style course with traditional style exams. So we have built up through, many steps along the way to bring that into the course in more ways to promote deeper learning and further understanding for the students. And the two-stage exam was one of those ways where they can say, okay, this is now aligning my learning objective or course learning outcomes with the assessment style. And so there's a lot of learning that even happens during the assessment itself, which I think is really powerful. The way that we do the two stages may be a little bit different than some of the other people because we do the group exam first. So it's not the same questions that they are exposed to in their individual exam. And it really acts as like a primer. So there is quite a lot of learning that happens during that group exam where they can, learn from each other, learn where maybe they need to spend a little bit more time studying for the upcoming individual exam, because it's usually the next day or within the next 48 hours. And the students have really seemed to grasp onto that. In the last year, they've been working in those groups every week during tutorials as well, under a very low stakes environment. The group exam only counts for grades if it helps their grade. So it's another sort of assessment activity that is not meant to provoke, increased anxiety. It is there for their learning experience. So yeah, we've had lots of feedback that's been supportive of that increased learning as opposed to the focus solely on their outcome and grade.
Thanks, Laura. Yeah, that was a really interesting component that came up in our first interview, the sequence that you have. So the group component is first, and the intention behind that is to decrease the exam anxiety, which we thought was a really interesting approach. So I'm going to throw the same question to David. Would you say that the two-part exam have allowed you to shift the focus from grades to learning? And if so, how?
Well, I use two-part assessments in my intro physics courses. These are freshman/foundation year U0 courses over on the McDonald campus. I have around 150 students in my classes. They're mostly life sciences, environmental science type students, so not really interested in physics at all. And about 20 in the BEng, bioresource engineering program. So they will use physics, but they're still maybe not too keen on it in their first year. I've implemented two-stage quizzes, so not midterm or final exams. In fact, I call them collaborative learning activities because a test or a quiz might be stressful, but it's branding. An activity is fun and it's collaborative and we're going to do it all together. I do it in the tutorial or in the lab time slot. And these are very low stakes assessments. So they're each worth maybe 1 or 2%. Total 10%, 15% of the final grade. So very low stakes, no stress. And I start them off from the very beginning of the semester. And that's really powerful. I'll talk more about that in a second. In the individual part, students can see where they stand in relation to their peers, and they can adjust their expectations and their preparation habits. And that's so important in a first year course. And right from the start of the semester, they see if they need help or not. And in the group part, I actually circulate and I help out. I give hints. And that really changes the atmosphere from, I'm the mean prof out to get you with the hard test to, yes, it's hard, but we're all in it together. And I'm here to help you succeed. I want you to learn the material. Here I am helping you out. And I can target groups. Some groups are done really quickly. They know their stuff. They're done. They leave. And the remaining groups I circulate, I help out, and I stay until everyone gets it. And that has a really big impact right from the start of the semester on how students approach the class, I find.
I think something that stands out for me for both of your implementations is really making sure that the students are working together from the beginning of the semester. So regardless of where the quiz or the exam falls, there's a certain level of familiarity, not necessarily comfort, because we know that there's also challenges that come in working in teams and groups, but at least they're creating habits of working together so that it's not just a one-off. And I'm sure Lawrence and Alice too have ideas about the peer-to-peer. So I'm going to go ahead and ask the second question. This question is for you, Alice. What feedback have you received from your students about using this strategy? And have you been able to incorporate that feedback into different iterations of the two-stage exams? Because sometimes students come up with good ideas, but we can't always necessarily implement them.
I implement the two-stage exam in organic chemistry, as Laura does. I teach in the Faculty of Agricultural and Environmental Sciences, so I teach in the same faculty with David. And our organic chemistry class is a U0 or U1 class, depending on the semester. And an important thing is that none of the students will be chem majors, and none of the students will probably need this stuff in very great depth of detail later in their studies. My enrollment is usually about 80 to 90 students, so it's a rather small class. And I started with two-stage exams due to a rather high failure rate in my class. And I realized that something's not jiving. I need a little bit more interaction with them. My two-stage exam is individual component first, and then the group component. It cannot lower their grade, so it can only help their grade. And the group component does not contain necessarily the exact problem or one of the exact problems from the individual component. This method is used for my two midterms, and the course does not have a final exam. So we have stepped away from final exams. When we first implemented it, on the very, very first implementation, as the students were exiting the room, we gave them a sticky note and we asked them to give us feedback, written feedback on how they felt about the experience. We collected all that, both for midterm 1, midterm 2, and they were absolutely totally ecstatic. They just loved it. They did not feel that they took a midterm. While they were working on the group part, I could sense the energy in the room. They were all happy. They were all chatting. They were really collaborating. And what I also noticed is that they were leaving. They were not talking about the individual part of the exam. They were not talking about what they necessarily got wrong on the first part of the exam. They were talking about their group component. So a definite shift in stress, a definite shift in mindset for an assessment. The one feedback that we got, and you talk about things that don't go as planned, I usually post the exam groups on my courses after the add drop deadline. And in my mind was like, okay, kids, you have the exam groups, you're going to get together, you're going to work in groups so you make your exam experience better. It was not clear. I really had to make an effort and organize them in groups throughout the semester to actually make the group component much more productive or useful. And I did it in two different ways. I did it once, or I did it a couple of times using Visual Classrooms, which is a tool that's integrated in my courses. And it's very good for organic chemistry because it allows you to upload drawings. And organic chemistry, it's all about drawings. We don't talk organic chemistry, we draw organic chemistry, right? So I put up problems, and then I organize the students in their exam groups, and I let them give peer feedback to each other so they can comment on what did you get wrong, what did you get right, how would you do this differently, so then they can start, using each other for help for the group component. And this worked relatively well, but what worked the best is what also Laura mentioned, is use the tutorial time in person, organize them in the groups that they will be on the exams, give them a problem set, let them work on them. I do the same thing as David does. I circulate. I better understand the dynamic of each group. By the time we get to exam, I know exactly where each group stands in strength or in weaknesses. I do help them along the way. And I think right now we are at a point where it's working well. I think the tutorial was really, really a good shift to actually in-person organizing the groups.
Thank you. Yeah, wonderful. And I think in addition to what you're saying too, or as a part of what you're saying is, and I'm hearing it from everyone so far too, is this notion that our students need practice at doing the kinds of assessments that we know will help them, because they might not necessarily have experience. And everyone's worked in a group, but it hasn't always had positive outcomes. So having these repetitive, low stakes opportunities to practice solving problems together without it being in an exam scenario, I can just see how students would really, really love that. As you say, Alice, the fact that they left the midterm not really worrying so much about, the mistakes they'd made, but rather the learning that had happened as they worked together in groups. I mean, that's fantastic. So Lawrence, same question for you, please.
Sure. Thanks, Margo. I guess I like David's description of the idea of a collaborative exam. And so I've used or am using collaborative exams in all the courses that I teach or have taught. So this includes a fundamental course taken by all engineering students on the engineering profession, in a technical elective course, and then also in a core course that I teach in electrical and computer engineering. And I'm going to describe more the use of the two-stage exam for that core course in electrical and computer engineering, which typically has anywhere between about 100 to 150 students. And so I agree that, we have to coach the students and get them comfortable working in groups and perhaps with the same people or the same students all throughout the semester. So I do a lot of collaborative learning and flip learning in the class. So the students are used to working a lot in class on activities and with each other. So it's not really surprising for them when they get to the two-stage final. What's happened in the past is, in the first instances when I gave the two-stage exam, I had students answer in the group part some of the same questions that they did in the first part. And the feedback that I got, and I had very little feedback actually, and probably it's because the students were just used to getting thrown all sorts of different pedagogical or instructional strategies in the course. So it's always different from what they were normally used to seeing. But of the little feedback that I did get, even though the idea is to reduce anxiety and stress, a little bit contrary to what Alice was suggesting, and maybe even Laura and David, some of the students were walking away and they were a little bit stressed in the sense that, now that we talked about it as a group and we worked towards an answer, I know I got it wrong. And then they were worrying about, what they got wrong or how that might impact their overall grade. So what I did as a change was then the second part really focused on a newer question that built on some of the things that they had done in the first part. But what was really nice in turning it into a learning moment, so just been addressing the first question that you had, was that towards the end of the course, we're still learning content up until about maybe the week before. And there's obviously less opportunities to give students time to practice, to work through examples and get feedback on the material in the last part of the course. And so that's typically an area where I think they struggle. And it's also an area where we bring a lot of concepts together. So there is a question on the individual part, but it's a little bit simpler. And then it gets more involved when they go into the group part. But it's at that group part where you do see them talking and actually reinforcing what they've learned or what they didn't know when they were trying to work through the individual part. And since that small change of not giving them the exact same question, I haven't heard as much of the, oh my gosh, I got it wrong in the first part when I was doing it anymore. But in general, I think the students have received this in a fairly positive manner. I've not heard of any worrisome feedback. Well, maybe that's not so true. The one feedback that I'm still looking at how to address is when we do the group portion, I have to be mindful of what's happening for the students who are writing their final exam with SAA, so with the Student Achievement and Accommodation, I think, office, because student accommodations and needs might vary for the students. And then how do you best put them to work in a group? Because if they've been working with with students in class in a group, they might not have those same students to work with when they're writing their file. So this is something that came to me just the last time I taught, last fall semester when I had this two-stage exam, and I haven't fully resolved or thought how to resolve that for the next time when I teach the course this coming fall.
Lawrence, what we have done is we have had them start the individual component earlier. So they finish the individual component at the same time as everybody starts the group component, and then they join in for the group component. Now, I realize it's not always possible, especially if it's slotted in between two other classes. But until now, cross fingers, that was my solution.
So I use the two-stage assessment more in the final exam, although I think this year I'm going to bring it into the midterm as well. And with the final, working with SAA, it was because everyone's accommodation is different and they don't start early, like before the start time of an exam. So if you have a 9 o'clock in the morning start, everyone starts at 9. So they can't start a student who has maybe an accommodation for extra time to start at 8:30, for instance, so that they've all finished the individual part at the same time. But what we did work through was this idea that they could do their individual part, then we stopped them at a certain time, then they went to the group part, and then they stopped, and then they went back to their individual part with the extra accommodation. And in fact, when we did this for one of the exams a year ago, what I did was I patched the students who were writing with SAA online to the exam room where the other students were working, and so they could participate via Zoom with their students. And that seemed to work reasonably well, but that had really a very set group. And then the next time, students didn't want to necessarily be forced into those groups, even though they were encouraged to work together in the same groups all the semester. And that's when it created a little bit more of a, okay, how do we group the people who are in SAA together? When I was speaking to Laura about this and just hearing her setup, I think having the group part take place first, perhaps towards the end of the semester in the last class, we can get that done there. And then they're able to work with their teammates and the people they've been working with all throughout the semester.
So when we started doing the group sort of on a very separate day and time as the individual, it really got rid of a lot of the complications. And we set the group exam as an inclusive assessment. Everyone's given sort of 2 times the amount of time as what we would expect. So accommodations are kind of met for the group exam, and they can work with whoever they want during that time. This past year, when we did it for the final, we actually did the group exam in the last class. So it was actually well ahead of the exam, but I was okay with that because, again, it's a learning experience. I want them to use it. We actually even did it as an open book group exam because it was 2 weeks before our individual final. I know they hadn't studied or, put in their final preparations yet. And I think that worked really well. And then when the individual final occurs, I mean, the students registered with SAA can have whatever time they need in their own environment that suits them. So that is something that has worked well for our class to accommodate everyone.
I have a similar issue, actually. It's with the really strong students who are done the individual part in, 5-10 minutes. And then they have to wait another 15 minutes. They can't just leave because the group part is starting. And it really pains me to see them just waiting and bored because I want them to enjoy this experience and I want them helping out their peers after. I want them to be engaged. I want them on my team. So I think I really like this idea of having the individual part and the group part on different days, maybe group before individual or individual before group, but on different days. So that's something I'll look into to separate the two.
Something else that brings up for me as well is the 2-week gap that you give, Laura, because from what you've said, all of you are working pretty much with first-year students whose study habits when it comes to exams are still coming from their previous level of study. And so this notion that, for the amount of complex content that they're working on at the university level, they have to be studying really constantly and continuously. So this notion of preparing for a midterm 2 weeks before it actually happens is because there's already enough to work through. So that's a really great idea too. David, did you want to add?
Sure. I was going to add, with respect to the repetition and the practice, I do this in my lab or my tutorial section. So I have to break up the class into several smaller groups and I have several versions of each activity or each quiz. And that's great for the students. I post all 4 versions on my courses. And, when they come up to me afterwards and they say, oh, yeah, I've got this now. I say, well, are you sure? Because maybe you should practice the other versions that are on my courses just to get into that cycle of practicing, failing, getting help, practicing again, failing again, getting help again, just that repetition. And I find that really, really powerful as well.
I have a brief question for everyone. The first year we did this, we did it in like the traditional evening midterm slots. And with, 500-600 people, this means we were spread like all across campus. So even with 100 students or 150, like, are you able to keep them all in the same room? Because we're doing it this year in class so that everyone's in our biggest classroom, like Leacock 132, but it's absolute madness. And so I just want to know how you do with like the logistics of keeping them together. Is there a room that works with tables? Because we're in an auditorium, which is really awkward for doing a group exam.
So I've done it with max of 100. I had organic at 100. We have the ballroom, which is set up with small tables, and the maximum setup is for 250 students. That's our final exam setup. So half of the room is set up for their individual, and half of the room I put desks together for the group component. So they move from one side of the room to the other side of the room. Probably would work to about 150, but not more than that. And again, in the group component, as you said, it's a little bit chaos because I'm running around from group to group. But until now, it has worked. And my groups are 4 people. I don't usually put more than that.
Well, I think with the final exam and holding the group part on a separate day, like the end of the semester, makes the logistics so much easier to handle. I can't really say that much on the midterm because I hold my midterms during class. But what I had to do in the past was work with the exam office to let them know I've got this weird format of the exam, so they obviously wouldn't stick my class in the main gym when all other students are writing their exams. And they usually found nice ways to do that. So in the past, they've given me several rooms in the gym building, or they've put me into, I think it's the studio, which can accommodate. And we've had a class of up to 150 students. So there is enough space for them to write within the 2 studios, their individual part. And then, as everyone said, it gets a bit chaotic when the individual parts are collected and you organize the students into little groups. So we factor that time in when we were setting it up all within a 3-hour window. But then once they got into their groups, it just rolled along, and there wasn't an issue there. So I think, if there are rooms that can accommodate, so if you have 600 and you can't have them all right in one room, but you put them into rooms of 100 and something or something of that nature, it is doable.
I find it so valuable to hear how you've all managed the logistics of this type of assessment, because the assessment strategy itself can be quite complex and difficult to implement. And you all have, large classes to some degree. And it's amazing to see the efforts that go into the management of this. And then on the other side, the student experience, it's really exciting to hear this recurring theme that came up, especially in the earlier questions, of the change in perception that they have of the assessment, and how the students come out of the exam with just a different energy, and there's more joy and excitement to something that traditionally is not the experience of the students in an individual final exam. So thank you so much for sharing, everyone.
Yeah, thanks for sharing what's worked and what hasn't, because that too is also illuminating. I think all of you have worked with the limitations or conditions of the system to make the strategy work for you and your students. And you've had to work out some of the difficulties of the limitations in infrastructure or hesitation on the part of the students. But you've taken risks in trying something new that you knew would help students, and that's really great. We stress student feedback a lot in this episode as being key to knowing whether an assessment task is working for them. I think something else that's worth mentioning is speaking to peers who are trying similar assessment methods to get their insights and to be inspired by them. And I'm really glad we had the opportunity to bring together our 4 guests today, a first for Teach, Learn, Share, to have that many guests, to be able to share with a wider public what collegial learning can sound like. So thanks again for being here.
Thank you, everyone, for tuning in. And remember to subscribe to Teach, Learn, Share and let others know about it. Until next time.